the Gonzaga Socratic Club. This year we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Gonzaga Socratic Club. I can hardly believe it myself. The club takes its name from the Oxford Socratic Club of the mid-1900s, which devoted itself to philosophical inquiry into the Christian worldview. Presided over by famous Christian apologist C.S. Lewis, the club sought to follow the Socratic injunction to follow the argument wherever it leads in finding the truth about Christian ideas and practices. There are seats scattered around if you folks want to find. Maybe if you have an empty seat next to you, if you could just raise a hand here. So yeah, we can squeeze in. Yes, we're glad everyone is here. C.S. Lewis speaks to a great number of people in a great number of ways. Through his fantasy fiction, his reflections on central Christian doctrines and mere Christianity, his whimsical and yet deadly serious ruminations on the reality and power of evil and human life in the Screwtape Letters, in his agony in the face of loss and grief in A Grief Observed, and so on. I could keep going, but you get the idea. Yet Lewis speaks, I think, most compellingly to decades of modern people because he, like we, was a modern person who had an encounter with transcendent divine reality. That is to say, Lewis experienced what we call a conversion. In the face of anti-theistic challenges to Christian belief, which are pretty common in modern culture, Lewis could note, again with a kind of whimsical seriousness, a young atheist cannot guard his faith too carefully. Dangers lie in wait for him on every side. He said that in Surprised by Joy. Lewis was able to say this because divine grace is at work in the life of every human being, drawing that person toward love. Our speaker today has his own story of grace, love, and conversion. Joseph Pearce is now known as a biographer and literary critic focusing on 20th century British fiction, especially Catholic and Christian authors like Tolkien, Belloc, Chesterton, and, yes, C.S. Lewis as well. And there's a fine table of merchandise at the back if you'd like to browse it after the talk and see if there's something that might interest you. Pearce is currently writer-in-residence at Aquinas College in Nashville, Tennessee, and director of the Aquinas Center on Faith and Culture. But as a young man, he was a political radical in the National Front, advocating British nationalism and white supremacy. This afternoon, he will share with us the story of his own conversion. A very special thanks to Gonzaga's Faith and Reason Institute and to its director, Dr. Brian Clayton. Professor Pearce's talk today is co-sponsored by the Catholic Intellectual Tradition Project of the Faith and Reason Institute. I'm grateful for their support and grateful that it's made Professor Pearce's presentation possible to us here at the Socratic Club today. Please join me in welcoming Joseph Pearce to the Gonzaga Socratic Club.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. It's not an interest. How many of you were at the talk last night? Okay, good. Suckers for punishment. Well, I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so giving my testimony, my conversion story. But I'm going to leave again. There's going to be plenty of time for questions. So be thinking about questions because obviously in 45 minutes it's not possible to cover all the details. Of course, it has all the details. What you're going to be hearing now is basically my own conversion story, which was told in Race with the Devil, my journey from racial hatred to rational love. Picture of the man on the cover there, who looks really mean, is indeed me. But the publisher sent a photographer around to my house, and every time I smile, the photographer just stops smiling. He took about 200 photographs and selected the one which makes me look most psychopathic. Maybe appropriate for the book, I'm not sure, but it's not me now anyway. So, I don't know how many of you are converts to Christianity, but many of you I can see are probably students, and even those of you that aren't students probably were students once, which means that all of you at some stage or other have had to write a paper. But when you're being instructed into being received into the Catholic Church, you're not normally asked to write a paper. It's very unusual. But the priest that was instructing me did actually ask me to write a paper. The reason for that was he knew that in my past life I was an editor of a magazine, in fact 2 magazines, and I was a writer. So he seemed it was appropriate, at least for me. You know, the worst part of writing a paper or an article or an essay or a book for that matter is looking at the empty page. Now, whether it's a blank piece of paper or whether it's a computer screen, that blank page, page 1, right, the first sentence is always the toughest. So here I am, imagine me, it's 1988 probably, and I'm being asked to write this paper why I want to be a Catholic. And how do I start? And then as if by some movement of grace, the opening lines of a very famous hymn entered my mind, and I thought this would be a perfect way to start the paper. So I began the paper with these 4 lines which you'll know. You'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to sing them, but unfortunately I will be singing later in the talk, singing in the broadest sense of the word. But the lines that came to my mind at that time were these lines, which I say I'm sure you know. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And those words, apart from them speaking for themselves, were even more appropriate in my case because they were written by John Newton, who prior to his conversion was a slave trader. Now my past was as a white supremacist, neo-Nazi, racist. So there's an added, because I knew that, there's an added poignancy and potency to those particular lines. So that's how I started. And what I think you'll see over the next half hour, 40 minutes, is indeed the working of an amazing grace. There's no other adequate way of explaining it. So, to go back to the beginning of the story, so to speak, I was raised in a secular culture. You'll have gathered by my accent that I'm not from Montana. I'm from England. I was raised in a secular culture, and my parents, or we as a family, never went to church. We never said prayers. The only time we went to church was for weddings. Never any prayers at all in our family. So I was raised basically in a secular culture. And my school, my high school in London, was a very bad school, all sorts of ways. Academically was bad, morally was bad, all sorts of stuff about it was awful. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about a good education today is because I'm a personal victim of a bad one when I was a high school age. But imagine this room now at Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington, is magically transformed into the auditorium of Eastby Comprehensive School in Barking, in the East End of London. Right? This is the school auditorium. You're all sitting there, and in the school auditorium, in great big letters, is the school's motto. And the school's motto is, "This above all, to thine own self be true." William Shakespeare. Now, my father taught me to revere William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare was the greatest Englishman who ever lived. So I remember thinking, well, I might be getting a really bad education here, but at least I could take that motto seriously and take that as my own personal motto. This above all, to thine own self be true. Because William Shakespeare said it. Of course, those words actually are words of radical relativism. That ultimately, above all else, the only thing that matters is yourself. And as long as you're true to yourself, nothing else matters. So William Shakespeare said that? Well, see, my school was ignorant of William Shakespeare. I was ignorant of William Shakespeare. I was 15 years old, so I had an excuse. But my school used it as their motto. Because the fact is, William Shakespeare never, ever said that. William Shakespeare wrote that. And in case you're thinking, well, what's the difference? Well, William Shakespeare wrote that to be said by Polonius in Hamlet. And Polonius is a blithering idiot. So Polonius says that. And that advice is given to Polonius' son, Laertes, one of the most famous speeches in Shakespeare. How many people here have read or seen perform Hamlet? Okay, a few. And basically, Laertes, Polonius' son, is going off to college. He's going to Paris to go to college. So Polonius thinks this is an appropriate time to give my son the pep talk, the meaning of life. So he gives him this speech about the meaning of life, and it's all about making the right friends, knowing when to pick an argument, knowing when not to pick an argument, knowing when to speak up, knowing when not to speak up, wearing the right clothes, picking the right friends, never borrow money, never lend money, and this above all, to thine own self be true. So this is Polonius' philosophy of life. Completely secular, completely relativist, no mention of objective morality, no mention of laying down your life for your brother, your friend, your enemy, no mention of God. Now what Hamlet shows is that Polonius, who's basically a very objectionable character in the place, a spy master, when he gets himself killed, we feel that, well, he basically deserved it. He was spying, and Hamlet thought it was someone else, and he gets himself killed. So Polonius, in following his own philosophy, gets himself killed. Laertes, in coming back from Paris, allows himself to be completely ruled by his passions, by his feelings, by himself, without seeking objective reality, becomes a naive dupe of the wicked King Claudius, the Machiavellian figure, and Laertes gets himself killed. Polonius' daughter is forced against her will, coerced into spying upon Hamlet, whom she loves. And that plays on her conscience so much that she's driven mad, insane, and commits suicide. So what does Shakespeare tell us about that philosophy? This above all to thine own self be true. That it's deadly, that it's dangerous, that it's destructive, and it is not a path to truth or goodness or beauty. But I didn't know that. My school took that motto out of context, said it was William Shakespeare, not Polonius, not understanding the play evidently, because it enshrined in an aphorism the radical relativism that I was taught. So, taking this motto as my own personal motto, I became a neo-Nazi. I joined an organisation called the National Front when I was 15 years old, amongst the policies of which was, and I can remember now the wording of the manifesto, word for word, the compulsory repatriation of all non-whites to their lands of ethnic origin. Now you think about that, by the way. It's not sending all immigrants back to the country that they came from. Sending all non-whites compulsory repatriation, so there's no question of choice, or compulsory repatriation, all non-whites to their lands of ethnic origin. So if you're a third generation person living in England, but your grandmother was born in Jamaica, you would be sent back by force to Jamaica. Now, I can condemn myself for becoming a white supremacist neo-Nazi. You have every right to condemn me for becoming a white supremacist neo-Nazi. But a radical relativist has no right to condemn me. Because a radical relativist just merely tells me I have to be true to myself. And I was being true to myself. I didn't think that these beliefs were evil. I thought that these beliefs were good. And as it's all about me, and it's all about subjectivism and relativism, my views, if it's about me, are as good as your views about you. Everything's reduced to opinion, and my opinions are as valid as yours. So I joined the National Front, very quickly become one of its leaders. I become chairman of the Young National Front, become the youngest ever member of the NF's governing body. I'm still a teenager. Started editing a magazine at the age of 16. And as if this wasn't enough, I was also very heavily involved in the violence and the terrorism in Northern Ireland. Now, most of you are much too young to remember what were known as the Troubles in Northern Ireland. But between the late 1960s and the late 1990s, I think it was over 3,500 people were killed in Northern Ireland violently because of the conflict between the two communities there. Now, I want you to get this in context. 3,500 people. The population of Northern Ireland is 1.5 million people. The population of the United States is, give or take, I think, about 300 million. So you'd have to multiply 3,500 by 200 to actually get an equivalent if it was in the United States. In other words, 750,000 people, 700,000 people, 750,000 people killed in that 30-year period. Now, the troubles were between the so-called Catholic community and the so-called Protestant community. But it was not about religion, it was about tribalism. And I want to illustrate what I mean by that. For instance, I first went to Northern Ireland in 1978 when I was 17, got involved in the mass riot in the city of Londonderry. Went on all night long, shops looted, burned to the ground, etc. So my baptism of fire in Northern Ireland, I then went back many times over the following years. I joined an organisation called the Orange Order. Now, the Orange Order is a secret society. It's a secret society which exists solely to hate Catholicism. It has no other purpose but to be anti-Catholic. If any of you are morbidly interested, by the way, I can give you the Orange Order's secret handshake. Come and see me after. You never know. Next time you might find yourself in an Orange Order meeting, and it'll be useful information to have. But they happen all the time in Washington. But I joined the Orange Order, and I was not, I was anti-Catholic. I considered myself a tribal Protestant, mostly because I was anti-Catholic. And because I was formerly an Anglican, formerly that's F-O-R-M-E-R, not F-O-R, sorry, F-O-R-M-A-L, not F-O-R-M-E-R, formerly. In form, I was an Anglican because I was baptised. Because in England, polite parents, in England, one of the things I said last night, that we ditched the 10 commandments, we only have one, which is, thou shalt not be impolite. So it's polite to have your children christened. Only barbarians don't do that, but as long as there's no prayer involved, it doesn't matter. So, formerly I was an Anglican, so therefore I was a Protestant, I was a tribal Protestant, anti-Catholic. I had a friend of mine who was a militant atheist. He was also in the Orange Order because he hated Catholics. And during the lodge meetings, when they read scripture, which is part of the ritual, he and I would look at each other across the room and smirk and sneer at this Christianity. Because we were anti-Catholic, we were Protestant, but it's purely tribal. And the best way I might be able to explain this to you is by telling you a joke. This really does explain the situation in Northern Ireland that you will not understand unless you get this joke. So back in the late 1970s, at the height of the Troubles, people were being killed every day in Northern Ireland. There's an American. This makes it funny, I think. There's an American, and he's walking in Belfast. Now, why an American would want to be in Belfast in 1977, I don't know. And then he's walking around, and Belfast city centre is sort of fairly safe unless a bomb goes off. You people aren't getting shot or anything there, so bombs go off. So he walks around, but anyway, he gets himself lost, and he finds himself in this rather nasty part of town. And he thinks, this is not a good place to be. And then his worst fears come through. Because out of the shadows comes this group of rather menacing-looking young men. And they come up to him and they say to him, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? And he thinks about this and says, this is a dangerous question. It's like playing Russian roulette or tossing a coin for your life. If I get the wrong answer, I'm a dead man. So he thinks for a moment, he says, you know, he says, I'm an atheist. And he's feeling rather smug at how clever that answer was, what a good answer that was. Got me out of a sticky situation. And it seems to have worked, because the young men, the young thugs look at each other and scratching their heads, don't really know what to make of that. But then they say, yes, but are you a Protestant atheist or a Catholic? And that's the whole point, okay, because it's a tribal badge, not a religion. So the two communities hated each other. I was very heavily involved, as well as being involved in the Orange Order, this secret society. I was very heavily involved with the two major loyalist, that's the so-called Protestant side, loyalist terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland, the UDA, the Ulster Defence Association, and the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force, both of which were responsible for killing hundreds of people during the Troubles. So I was involved with those in ways that I'm not going to, we'll move on. But there was a situation. I was at a drinking club in Rath Hall, just north of Belfast. And one of the ways that the terrorist organisations in Northern Ireland made money was through drinking clubs. Another way was by robbing banks. Drinking clubs were safer. Eventually, by the way, they started selling drugs, which is safer still. Which was disastrous for them because it turned the population against them, but that's another matter. In the early 70s, by the way, Belfast was the most drug-free city in England. Because whenever drug pushers came on the streets of Belfast, the terrorist groups on both sides would kneecap the drug pushers, which is basically shooting their knees off. That's a good deterrent. So there were not many drugs in the early 70s. But in the end, of course, the terrorist groups become more corrupt. They found that actually selling drugs is a much safer way of getting money to buy guns than robbing banks. So that's what they started to do. But that was all after my time, that was later on. So I was involved with the UDA and the UVF, and I was drinking in a UVF drinking club, Ulster Volunteer Force drinking club, and listening to the band singing anti-Catholic songs and having the time of my life and drinking too much. And then I got a tap on the shoulder. And I was told that someone wants to see me outside. Now, when you're in a club that's run by a terrorist organisation, they're not words you want to hear. So I'm thinking, oh, what have I done? I've been in the country, been in Northern Ireland for 5 days. What have I done that's upset somebody here? I'm in trouble. And I went outside, there was not much choice, and there were 3 men standing there. And that's bad news. Because if any of you know anything about terrorism, that's the size of a terrorist cell. It's the dynamics, always good terrorist, good. Efficient terrorist organisations, that's the number for a terrorist cell. 2 doesn't work, 4 is bad for security, 3 is the perfect number. So I thought this is probably, they don't call themselves cells, they call themselves active service units. But it's a terrorist cell. So I thought, this is not good. And then the leader of the group came up to me and started talking and saying they had become disillusioned with the leadership of the UVF because they thought that they were getting too soft. And this is a terrorist organisation of basically pathological psychopaths. But this particular terrorist group thought they weren't pathological or psychopathic enough. So what they wanted to do was to actually defect to become the terrorist wing of the Young National Front, of which I was the chairman, and they would take their orders directly from me, and that they would kill anybody I wanted killed. And they said, as a mark of good faith, they would show me their arsenal of weapons. And I said, no, I believe you. I did. Now I was in an awkward situation, a bit like that American. Because thanks be to God, by the grace of God, I've never wanted to have anybody killed. So I wasn't interested in this offer. But also I didn't want to offend these 3 young men. So I had to equivocate. So it's a great idea. We should do that. I'm going to be in touch. So I'm back on the other side of the Irish Sea, back home and safe in England. I never got back in touch with them. Within a year, the leader of that terrorist cell, the one who was doing the talking, was sentenced to life imprisonment for shooting dead the mother of an IRA man on her doorstep. Now, to be fair to him, I don't think he was aiming to kill the mother. I think he knocked on the door, rang the doorbell in a neighbourhood. It's probably an IRA neighbourhood. He's probably scared. He knows he has to get out of there quickly. He doesn't get out of there at all. So whoever opens the door gets it. Instead of the IRA man opening the door, his mother opened the door and she got it, probably because he was scared. All right, as if my involvement in Northern Ireland terrorism and neo-Nazi radicalism wasn't enough, I was also very heavily involved with the neo-fascist movements in Europe. So I was involved, for instance, in an organisation called Terza Posizione, third position, an Italian neo-fascist group based in Rome, who were alleged to have been responsible for the planting of a bomb at Bologna railway station in the late 1970s, I think it was, maybe early 1980s, that killed over 150 people. And when warrants were put out for the arrest of the leaders of this organisation, they basically smuggled themselves out of the country across Europe and ended up in England, and we put them up in safe houses until things had calmed down somewhat. Now the leader of that group, ironically enough, someone called Roberto Fiori, very charming man. Italians are charming if they are terrorists. Is now actually a member of the European Parliament. At least the last time I looked he was a member of the European Parliament. He seems to have found religion, he's about Catholicism, he seems to be pro-life. I have no idea what his other positions are now, and I'm certainly not endorsing him, but it's a strange world. And for what it's worth, I don't think they were responsible for planting that bomb. I don't think they were responsible, but I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because I didn't ask. And the reason I didn't ask is because of something called the need to know principle. If you're involved in any way with terrorism, you always abide by the need to know principle. If you don't need to know, don't ask. And it's a very simple reason that once you know, you're involved. Once you have the knowledge, you are involved. So for your own sake, don't ask. And of course, from the perspective of the terrorists, the fewer the people who know what they're doing, the better. It's good from their perspective, it's good from your perspective. So I never asked. Okay, so neo-Nazi, white supremacist, anti-Catholic, militant, involved with terrorist organisations, fraternising with neo-fascist Italians and other neo-fascists from Germany and other places, neo-Nazis. I also became very heavily involved in the skinhead movement, which in the 1980s, early 1980s in England was very big. And I founded a record label called White Noise Records. And it was a perfect name for the record label because it was white and it was noise. And the first record we released, of course this old age record, they are a disc, two sides, vinyl, whatever it's called now, right? So on the A side of this band, it's by a band called Screwdriver, spelled with a K as in skinhead. And if you're really morbid and want to know, YouTube, Screwdriver, and all this horrible stuff will come up. But the first thing we released was a song called White Power by Screwdriver. And I was asked by the band to be guest vocalist on this record. And my part in it was at the chorus. And here comes the chorus, I had to sing. White power! That was it. And after all these years, I still remember the words. And I can still sing it in tune. And the B side of the record was a track called Smash the IRA. And I did the guest vocals on that, and my part was smash, smash. And if you really want to hear that for real, YouTube, White Power by Screwdriver, or Smash the IRA by Screwdriver, you can listen to it. And this teenage young man had some endearing qualities. You're not thinking that? Well, I was also extremely anti-American, to add to my overall charm. And we organised demonstrations outside US air bases with the Yanks go home and our members would be fighting with members of the US Air Force in the local pubs. So, no, it wasn't very charming or attractive. I edited a magazine called Bulldog, a newspaper of the Young National Front, and for editing this magazine I'll be sent to prison twice for publishing material likely to incite racial hatred. And the first time, I was 20 years old, as they dragged me off to the cells when I was found guilty, I yelled at the judge that he was an enemy of the British people and he would face his own judgment. I considered myself to be a political prisoner, to be a political soldier, to be a prisoner of war, and I used my cell and the bunk bed in my cell to do bench press or get in good shape so I'd come out and be a better radical. I came out and I continued to edit Bulldog, but I didn't want to go straight back to prison again, and nor was I prepared to dilute its racism and its message of racial hatred. So the editor of Bulldog became Captain Truth, a superhero. And there's a picture of Captain Truth on the cover, and he had a mask on, a huge chest with a big T on it, Truth. Captain Truth. The editor of Bulldog. Now, the British police force are not the smartest people in the world. After about a year, I think they began to suspect Captain Truth didn't exist. All their lines of inquiry have taken nothing. No superhero living here. So they began to suspect that I was actually really Captain Truth. So in the middle of the night, when I was fast asleep, the police broke into my house, raided my house, got all the evidence they needed to prove that I was indeed still the editor of Bulldog. I was charged once again with publishing material likely to incite racial hatred, whereas the first time I was sentenced to 6 months in prison, the second time I was sentenced to 12 months in prison. I spent my 21st and my 25th birthdays in prison. However, there was a huge difference between the two prison sentences. As I said, the first sentence, I was a militant, I was radical, I was angry, fanatical. Second prison sentence, I'm sitting there at the beginning of the sentence thinking, I don't even believe this stuff. Why am I in prison for 12 months for something I don't even believe in? And the second day of that prison sentence, I was standing there, sitting there actually in my cell, with rosary beads in my hand. And I'm going to come to that in a moment, because I want to pray the rosary. Why the change? How the change in that 4 years between the two prison sentences? Well, I was at least interested in religion, and I was very anti-Catholic, so you'd never have got me to read a religious book, a Christian book, not one of my own, let alone a Catholic book. But I was, of course, very interested in politics. And we would get involved in lots of fights with the extreme left, with the communists. And apart from physical fights, they would also yell abuse at us. And one of the things they would accuse us of being was the stormtroopers of capitalism. You are just the stormtroopers of capitalism. I'm a young radical, and my attitude is, I may despise communism. That doesn't mean I want the world being run by the International Monetary Fund and Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates wasn't around then, but whoever the 1980s equivalent of Bill Gates was, by huge global corporations, huge international financial institutions like IMF, the World Bank, etc. And I refused to accept that communism was the only alternative to that, or that that was the only alternative to communism. In other words, I was looking for an alternative to either, if you like, globalism, plutocratic globalism, or communism. And someone said, well, have you looked at the political and economic ideas of G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc? Who are they? But anyway, I trusted this person, and he said, well, you need to read one essay by Chesterton in particular. And I said, fine. And he said, well, it's in a book called The Well and the Shallows. Fine. The book was out of print in those days. I managed to get hold of a copy. And the essay, which he said I needed to read, was 2/3 of the way through the book. But I decided to start reading from page 1. My attitude was, if this man Chesterton's worth reading, he's worth reading. What's he got to say? And what I didn't realise, until I started reading, that the well and the shallows, the well, that which has depth, that gives life-giving water, is the church. And the shallows is everything else. And that book basically is a defence of the Catholic Church against various modern attacks upon it, including the modern heresy of race. You know, Hitler come to power, this was one of Chesterton's last books, published in 1935. Hitler come to power 2 years earlier. And of course I didn't agree with everything Chesterton said. I mean, how could I? I'm a neo-Nazi, I'm an anti-Catholic. But for some reason, I couldn't help liking Chesterton. I couldn't help liking his sense of humour, his personality, his goodness, his virtue, and indeed a lot of the things he said. Right? Not everything, certainly not the religious stuff, which was a lot of. So I then started going around second-hand bookshops in England, buying copies of any Chesterton book I could get my hands on. And then I came across this book, in East London bookstore, second-hand bookshop. My eyes lighted upon this book, by somebody called C.S. Lewis. And I'd heard of C.S. Lewis. Wasn't sure I knew anything about him. I think I knew that he'd written The Lion of Richard and Wardrobe, a very famous book after all. I'd never read it. I didn't have much idea what it was about. It's a children's book about a magic wardrobe. That's about all I knew. Must have a lion in it somewhere. But something got me to take this book from the shelf. By this unknown writer. And it was Surprised by Joy, which is C.S. Lewis's own conversion story. But I didn't know that. It doesn't say that on the cover, it just says Surprised by Joy. So what I used to say when I was giving this talk is I did what I did all the time in those days. I looked in the index for the magic word Chesterton. I would then go to that page, and if the author says something good about Chesterton, I'd read on. But as someone pointed out to me, I couldn't have done that in this case, although I thought I had, because Surprised by Joy does not have an index. But that makes it even more magical. Because what I must have done in that case was open the book at random. And my eyes came upon the magic word Chesterton. And it's when C.S. Lewis talks about his own first reading of Chesterton, when he's in the British Army during World War I. And Lewis is an atheist at this time. And he says, you'd have thought that, you know, being an atheist, I'd have nothing in common with G.K. Chesterton. But I couldn't help liking him. I think, yeah, that's right. I agree, I help liking him. And he says, I loved his sense of humour. Yeah, exactly, sense of humour. He's quite a C.S. Lewis chap. And he says, and it seemed to me that G.K. Chesterton had more common sense than all the moderns put together, except, of course, his Christianity. Yes, exactly, except, of course, his Christianity. So I went and bought Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis, which is, of course, Lewis's own conversion from militant atheism to Christianity. And I couldn't help liking C.S. Lewis. So from falling in love with Chesterton, I met Lewis, I also met Hilaire Belloc. So this was the beginning of the second prison sentence. I was beginning to really question the beliefs that had radicalised me as a youth. I didn't know I believed anymore. So I'm holding these rosary beads. Now I knew what rosary beads were, because my father, I inherited a lot of my Catholicism from my father. He used to call Catholics bead rattlers, those who rattled their beads. Myself, yeah, I'm sure I can beat up the rest of them now. Bead rattlers. So I knew what rosary beads were. Also in Northern Ireland, we used to sing a song that mentioned rosary beads, an anti-Catholic song, rather bizarrely to the tune of, oh, just tangled up here. Rather bizarrely to the tune of Home on the Range. the dulcet tones of smash, smash and white power, notwithstanding. So it went like this. No, no Pope of Rome, no chapels to sadden my eyes, no nuns and no priests, no rosary beads, every day is the 12th of July. If someone wants to know what the 12th of July is, ask me a question afterwards. So no nuns and no priests, no rosary beads. And also when I was a child, my mother's mother was Irish in County Galway. She didn't practice her faith as far as I know. I know that she had 9 children and none of them were brought up as Catholics. But when she died, my mother brought home her rosary beads. Not because my mother had any inclination to say the rosary, nor could she have said it if she wanted to. But she just brought it home as a keepsake, as a memento of her mother. My father came back from the pub, somewhat inebriated one night. He said, we're not having those papist beads in this house, and threw them out the window. So I knew what rosary beads were. Here I am holding rosary beads in the cell, second day of a 12-month prison sentence. And I couldn't throw them out the window. My cell had bars on the window. It was that window you could open, so you could climb out, you could throw things out of it. But I had no desire to throw the rosary beads out of the window. What I wanted to do was to pray. I never prayed in my life. 20 years old, no, sorry, not 24 years old. And how does one pray the rosary? Well, with difficulty. Because I didn't know the Apostles' Creed, I didn't know the Hail Mary, didn't know the Glory Be, and I had been taught the Our Father when I was about that high, but had long since forgotten it. So how does one pray the rosary? Well, what I did was to fumble the beads and mumble inarticulate prayers. First time I'd ever prayed. Answers started to flood in, healing started to flood in. I started to go to Mass in prison. During that second prison sentence, by the way, I read The Lord of the Rings for the first time. It's a conversation stopper, you know, when did you first read Lord of the Rings? Oh, during my second prison sentence. You know, but I've been looking at it for years, you know, it's so thick. I've got to read this book one of these days. And now, you know, I'm too busy, never had enough time. Now here I am in a prison cell, 12 months to go, perfect. So I read The Lord of the Rings in prison, I read much John Henry Newman, and Thomas Aquinas, and it's all over at that point, of course. So when I came out of prison, I knew I had to start a fresh life. But I knew nobody. Imagine I joined this radical organisation when I was 15 years old. I'm now 25. I knew nobody that wasn't involved in politics. No friends, except for those that thought I was a hero, because I just came out from a second prison sentence, that I no longer wanted to associate with. So I had to physically leave London, went to an agricultural, agrarian backwater on purpose to get away from all of the politics. And shortly after that, I was received into the Catholic Church. And on the day I was received, unbeknownst to me, the priest had secretly got ladies of the parish a baker cake, welcome home, Joe on it. And this sort of reception afterwards, they asked me to make a speech. I you'd have gathered that I'm not lost for words. And that was the only time in my life, I think, that I was. Because what does one say when faced with the enormity and the magnitude of being received into Christ's mystical body and having just received his body and blood? All I said was, I've come home. And all that I can say now, when faced with the magnitude, is the same thing. I've come home. I want to say this because I always feel guilty if I don't, that my father was also received into the Catholic Church 10 years before his death. Consider in many ways his own conversion to be more miraculous than mine. And by the grace of God, I was living over here when he was taken to hospital and he died a few days later. But by the grace of God, I happened to be in Cambridge, England, for a C.S. Lewis conference. And I had to cancel my talks because my father was on his deathbed. And as my father faced his final hours on earth, I had the knowledge of 300 or 400 C.S. Lewis loving Christians praying for my father. And my father received the last rites of the church. I was there when he received communion for the last time. He could eat by this stage. He had a tiny crumb. Bless the sacrament from his tongue, a bit of water. And the last thing we did together was pray the rosary. Okay, and now, just the postscript, finish off with the postscript. After I became a Catholic, I should say, by the way, that my name was notorious in England. These prison sentences made front-page news. You could not travel more than 10 miles on any freeway in England during those prison sentences without Free Joe Pearce being on the bridges above the freeway. So when I wanted to write a book after my conversion, I knew I couldn't use my own name. There's no secular publisher, no publisher, period, would publish anything by me. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to use a pseudonym. So I chose the name Robert Williamson. Now, why did I choose the name Robert Williamson? Well, because there's a song. You think, oh my God, he's not singing again, is he? There's a song, an Orange Order song, right? This anti-Catholic fanatical secret society. The song called The Old Orange Flute. And it goes like this. In the county Tyrone, near the town of Dungannon, where many's a ruction, myself at a Hannon, Bob Williamson lived there, a weaver by trade, and all of us thought him a stout orange blade. But the cunning young coo-boy sure took us all in, and he married a papish called Bridget McGinn, turned papish himself, and forsook the old cause that gave us our freedom, religion, and laws. Now the boys of the town, they made some noise upon it, and Bob had to fly to the province of Connaught. And so it goes on. So I'm thinking, that's me. You know, I am the former member of the Orange Order who becomes a Catholic. I am Robert Williamson. I am Bob Williamson. Because I hadn't married a papish called Bridget McGinn from County Tyrone in the town of Dungannon, but that's minor details. I am Bob Williamson. I am the orange man who becomes a Catholic. So that's the name I use, Robert Williamson. And then, a few years later, I met a wonderful American lady in Oxford, who I fell in love with. If you said to me 10 years earlier I'd marry an American, I'd have laughed you to scorn. But Susanna's mother is from the county Tyrone, near the town of Dungannon. So God has a sense of humour. He thought, this is a good joke, we can go with this. So I didn't marry Bridget McGinn, but I did marry Bridget McGinn's daughter from a little village just outside County Tyrone called the Rock. And just to finish, my first book as a Catholic was my biography of G.K. Chesterton. And I always say that book was an act of thanksgiving. An act of thanksgiving to God for giving me Chesterton. But also an act of thanksgiving to Chesterton for giving me God. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Thank you very much. Disappeared. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
Not so much a question, but two reflections. I was a Catholic priest in Yakima in the 70s, early 70s, and had the great fortune of living with several Irish priests. Guys in Yakima had over 30, I think maybe closer to 50 Irish priests.
So, given my English ignorance, where is Yakima?
All central Washington.
Okay, local.
Local.
I thought it was somewhere in
South,
Russia.
Southwest.
Okay.
I was at St. Paul's Cathedral and spent many hours down in the basement rec room with my buddies, drinking scotch and them reliving their life in Ireland, singing many a song.
Most of which I probably know.
Black Velvet Band. So your reflections,
Those days.
then 1 year ago, we were in Athens, and across the street from our hotel was a little art shop run by two very interesting characters. One was from Australia, and the other was a former Belfast policeman whose total family was killed in a car bomb by the IRA. He figured he was the target, but he didn't die. His brother was also a Belfast policeman, and he left 18
He
years
was
ago.
Catholic, was he?
Pardon?
Was he Catholic?
No, he was.
You know, the IRA deliberately targeted Catholic policemen because they wanted to polarize the community. They didn't want Catholics to be part of the police force because, you know, if you're Catholic, you have to go outside.
No, he
So
was.
they terrorized people for not joining the police force.
And so he left Ireland 18 years ago, and I don't think he was a return. He didn't go into detail on that, but it devastated his life. But like you said, the principle of only needing to know what you need to know. I never told him I was a priest, and I didn't tell him I was Catholic. But it was,
a need to know principle. Exactly. I also had a couple of friends killed in the time.
What were the circumstances of your acquiring rosary beads that you had to do in prison?
That's a very good question. You know, the only honest answer is I can't remember. Now, part of me might want to say it was magic. Hey, there's a rosary piece in my hand. I mean, clearly that wasn't the case, but it was the second day of the prison sentence. I remember that clearly. So they couldn't have been sent in to me. So someone must have given them to me. I'm guessing it must have been during the trial. Now, I didn't know many Catholics, but there were one or two Catholics that what we call clerical fascists. They were sort of involved with the movement. We thought they were weak on race. And they weren't as racist as they should be, but they were sort of, you know, wacky in other ways. So it's probably one of those, but honestly can't remember.
Having come from a history of being involved in terrorism, you know, are there any anecdotes besides Love Thy Neighbor that you talked a lot about last night that we could take towards dealing with radical Islam? Or do you think that it's, is it too divided?
Well, that's a very, very good and a very, very big question. Radical Islam is ultimately, this is going to be controversial, radical Islam is ultimately the consequence of some diabolical politics since World War II. That's basically radicalized large parts of the Islamic population. Islam is only ever united when it has a great Satan that can unite it. So there's no great Satan that can unite it. It fights amongst itself. Even now you see them killing each other more than killing anybody else. So Israel gave them the catalyst, the great Satan, and the United States, as far as it supports Israel as the great Satan. That's the uniting force. And when that passes away, and I think it will, I think it will pass away primarily because I don't think there's an appetite in the United States to continue to support Israel. That when that happens, I think that radical Islam will end up being a wave that largely breaks, and that they will end up killing each other again, which they normally end up doing. So that's a controversial answer to a controversial question.
What role did your family play throughout your whole 10 years?
Well, one of the things in my book that I make a point of handling is my relationship with my father, which I love my father. I had actually a very good relationship with my father. I mean, especially when you hear about so many people who had abusive relationships with my father. My father loved me, and you know, he's never abusive, and I was very, very close to him. And that was part of the problem, because of course I just imbibed and accepted everything I got from my father's knee, if you like, including his racism and his anti-Semitism, and You know, one of the things my father used to say to me when I was growing up was there are only three types of people in the world. Englishmen, those who would like to be Englishmen, and those who don't know any better. So after a show of hands, which group you're in. Now, of course, when my father was saying that, there was an element of fun, there was an element of humour, but nonetheless, deep down, he basically believed that. You know, and so therefore I grew up also basically believing that. So a lot of my growing up, you know, into some sort of semblance of common sense of wisdom was unlearning a lot of the stuff I learned in the family. But then also my father taught me a love of Shakespeare, a love of poetry, a love of beauty, a love of history. So many, many good things. So I mean, one of the most difficult things about writing that book was getting that relationship with my father right. Because like walking a tightrope, and also like my relationship with myself right. Because like walking a tightrope, you don't on the one hand be self-loathing, and look how horrible I was in the past. That's dehumanizing me and the people around me. Or you don't also want to be self-righteous. You know, yeah, I did this, but there's also good reasons for it. So you've got to walk a tightrope between those two extremes, and that's one of the reasons I've been meaning to write that book for years and years and years. Because one reason I didn't is I couldn't possibly write it while my parents were alive, to be perfectly frank. But also, I hadn't reached a period of maturity and critical distance to enable me to do it in any way with any confidence that I'll do it well. And I think I have done it well. And the comments that everyone's making seems to buck this fact. Yeah.
Do you identify yourself as a traditionalist?
Yes, well, the label's always difficult. I don't like the word conservative because the word conservative covers a multitude of sins and one or two virtues. So the word traditionalist I actually prefer. But that's not without problems because there are many traditions, such as the traditions the Orange Order hold dear. Tradition's not necessarily good because it's a tradition. But in terms of the church, I call myself a traditionalist, and the best way of my explaining that would be in the sense of Tolkien. Always bring Tolkien to your support in these cases. But you know, in the 1960s, there was an element, you know, modernism, which was attacking the church from the perspective of the present and present fads and fashions, but also primitivism. That somehow you have to get back to the purity of the early church. Right? So there's two attacks on the church. And Tolkien's response was brilliant. He says, and typically of Tolkien he uses the metaphor of a tree. Okay? He says, I don't understand why a sapling is considered superior to the full-grown tree. Talking about the Catholic Church. And he said that even if the sapling were superior to the full-grown tree, if you chop down the tree looking for the sapling, you don't find the sapling, you kill the tree. And for me that sums the whole thing up. The Catholic Church has 2,000 years of rich history. It's responded to all sorts of things. Chesterton said, the Catholic Church is the one continuous institution that's been thinking about thinking for 2,000 years. And this institution has been thinking about thinking for 2,000 years and responding to all sorts of nonsense, philosophically, theologically, politically, and it's still here. You know, perhaps we should listen to it and listen to its rich tradition. So that's why I call myself a traditionalist. Yeah. You're next, by the way. I keep overlooking you. Not on purpose. Yeah.
Have you had any experiences with your former colleagues since your conversion?
Yeah, I mean, you know, thankfully I'm not narcissistic enough to spend too much time surfing the web about myself. But there have been moments, dark moments in my life when I've actually done that. And there certainly are websites where my name is very much mud, where I'm a traitor to the cause. And there's certainly, I mean, you probably not go back to Northern Ireland. And there's certainly one or two parts of England where even now, perhaps I would think twice if I go back to. But the other side of things here is that I actually have received quite a few emails over the years, and especially actually since the book was published, from former comrades of mine who have become Christians, and in many cases Catholic, and there's one former comrade of mine from those dim and dark past who's now a Catholic priest. So, yeah. Anyone else? Oh, yes, please.
After your conversion and your father's conversion, was there a feed-off on your conversion to your dad and vice versa? Was that independent?
Well, we were very close. We remained very close. So, you know, when Catholicism was becoming important to me, we would argue about it. I mean, what I always think about my relationship with my father is what Chesterton said about his relationship with his brother. In his autobiography, Chesterton says that he and his brother were arguing, but we never quarreled. So my father and I would be arguing all the time, we never quarreled. And so we'd argue about Catholicism, you know, and I became a Catholic first, but I think, you know, he was already on the path. It just took him a few more years to get down to formalising it by being received. But yeah, we helped each other there by arguing about the issues. You know, I'd be reading a book, for instance, by Carl Adams' Spirit of Catholicism, and the ecclesiology in that. What is the Catholic Church? You know, the Catholic Church is not a human institution. It's the mystical body of Jesus Christ. It's the bride of Jesus Christ. It's one flesh, because it's a marriage. The bride and the groom, Christ and the bride are one. And you can't separate the Catholic Church from the mystical body of Jesus. Right, when you understand that, then of course we're all, as individuals in the church, are miserable sinners. You know, like the cells on my skin are all going to die because they're mortal. You know, but I haven't got a single cell of my body that was there 10 years ago. So the Catholic Church is something which is the mystical body of Jesus, and the fact that we're all parts of that body. The Church is not defined by our humanity, but by its divinity or her divinity. So the point is, those are the sort of things I'd be arguing with my father, you know. And so when you talk about corrupt popes and corrupt Catholics, that's not a problem. You know, it's not a problem for me at all, because that's not what the Catholic Church is. The Catholic Church is made up of miserable sinners. There's something very controversial that Chesterton said, and you know, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I think there's a real grain of truth here. He says that one of the differences between Catholics and Protestants is that Protestants say, I'm a good Protestant. Catholics say I'm a bad Catholic. And Catholics go to Mass because we know we're miserable sinners. We go to Mass the same reason we go to the hospital. Because we need healing. Now there's an element, a certain branch of Calvinism, should we say. I don't want to paint all Protestants with this brush. Chesterton did, but I don't want to. There's a certain branch of Calvinism, you've been saved. You are saved, period. You know, unlike the rest of those people out there, you're one of the elect. So there's that element, you know, because I'm saved, I'm good. Because you're not saved, you're bad. Well, for a Catholic, no, I'm not worthy to judge where you are. I know that the problem's with me. And again, Chesterton, he was asked once, there's a newspaper was asking lots of famous people a simple question: what's wrong with the world? And Chesterton's reply was, I am. And that's where we all have to begin. What's wrong with the world? I am. If I want the world to be a better place, where does it start? Yes.
Since we are here at the Socratic Club, you said that the hook for you to begin reading Christian apologetic literature was political ideas, and you've emphasized by referring to Amazing Grace, the role that grace plays. I wonder, can you share with us what are some of the key ideas or concepts that you found in that apologetic literature, Chesterton, Lewis, Belloc, that resonated with you?
Well, I mean, first of all, Chesterton was the first, and still probably under Grace, the biggest single influence on my conversion. You know, I began with The Well and the Shallows, but obviously I read The Everlasting Man, Orthodoxy, his book on Aquinas, his books on Francis of Assisi, well, just about everything, basically. Just by the time that I was received in the church, I'd read just about everything by Chesterton, the published books, anyway. During the second prison sentence, apart from Lord of the Rings, I read Apologetics and Catholic Doctrine by Archbishop Sheehan, a wonderful work of, part one is the philosophical proofs for the existence of God, and part two is Catholic doctrine, so philosophy and theology in one volume. And then I read Copleston, F.C. Copleston, the Jesuit philosopher's book on Aquinas, which was very, very important to me. I read Newman's Apologia for Vita Sua, his own conversion story. And I actually became very insatiable in my desire to read other people's conversion stories. And that was the genesis for my own book, Literary Converts. I look at all the converts to Catholicism in the 20th century and how they energized each other. There was this network of grace and this network of minds all energizing each other. So I was convinced until fairly recently, actually, partly because of a blindness on my part, but I was convinced until fairly recently that my conversion was entirely rational. And it's only more recently that I realized the other thing that was going on simultaneously with that was healing. There's a grace of healing going on, because there are aspects, in the recesses of my heart where the hatred lurked. It wasn't really a rational thing. Now, of course, something which isn't rational, the best way of getting over that is to see that it's irrational and see the reason why it's irrational and come to a better perspective. But some things are so sort of almost prejudiced, almost instinctive, so it seems, that you can't heal yourself through appropriate reading of rational literature. You do need mystical grace, you do need healing. And I become aware of that now, partly because, and one of the reasons I didn't realise this was happening is that part of my sickness was not knowing I was sick. That many of the things that were wrong with me, I didn't think were things that were wrong with me at the time. So how do you put something right if you don't think it's wrong? Well, only through something mystical grace. Yeah.
What happened on the 4th of July?
4th of July in 1688. No, 1690. In 1688, the true King of England, I mentioned this briefly yesterday actually in the Rings talk, King James II, who was a Catholic, was forced from the throne by a coup d'etat, by what the Protestants call a glorious revolution. So even they admit it was a revolution. The true king is forced into exile by an army of mercenaries, basically. King James raises an army and lands in Ireland, where a lot of the Catholics support him. And his army, King James's army, meets Prince William of Orange's, now calls himself King William III, the usurper, in a battle at the Boyne, the Battle of the Boyne in Ireland, and the Protestant side win the battle. So the Orange Order, who named itself after William of Orange, the king who wins that battle, that's their day, 12th of July. So 12th of July every year is the marching season, is the climax of the marching season in Northern Ireland, where tens of thousands of bands, the marching bands, and orange men march on the streets of Belfast and other Northern Ireland cities, celebrating that victory 430 or so years ago. Yeah.
As a 15-year-old, was there someone who helped introduce you into the club of joining?
Well, I think my father voted for the National Front in the 1974 general election. I was 13, so I was aware what it was, but it was actually very big in the part of London I lived. And so at the age of about 14, I started writing the NF slogan on my school books, swastikas on my school books,